Greetings to you all. This is Tendai Dumbuchena, host of the podcast Africa in Crisis. Welcome to episode 14. 2 weeks ago in South Africa, 3 former presidents of the country, Thabo Mbeki, Kgalema Motlanthe, and Jacob Zuma, took an unprecedented step of publicly criticizing current incumbent Cyril Ramaphosa. The criticism echoed a widely held view that Ramaphosa is a weak and ineffective leader incapable of taking hard decisions. As a result, the country remains mired in corruption and unable to arrest and reverse its economic decline. Zuma went further to impugn Ramaphosa's integrity, following failure to report the theft of large amounts of money at his game farm. The jury is still out on that matter. If it is any comfort to President Ramaphosa, deficient political leadership is a malady that afflicts the whole of Africa. Last Friday, the Secretary General of Amnesty International, Agnes Callamard, called for, to use a word, enlightened leadership in Africa at the conclusion of visits to Mali and Senegal. The purpose of the visits was to investigate reports of an upsurge in human rights abuses and erosion of civil liberties in the 4 countries. She stressed, however, that this situation was replicated in many West African countries. It is worth quoting some of what she said. Open quote, "The world needs enlightened leadership from African leaders. We find it at the level of civil society. Now we should also find it at the level of political leadership. In this context, in which human values are being flouted, we need real leaders. We need authentic leadership. We need people who stand out from this. I would hope that perhaps these leaders could emerge or be found in Africa. Nelson Mandela was such an example." End of quote. There was a false dawn in the 1990s when virtually all African countries abandoned one-party rule to seemingly embrace multi-party democracy. This hope was further raised in 2002 when the African Union adopted a declaration on democracy, political, economic, and corporate governance. The declaration committed to, open quote, "just, honest, transparent, accountable, and participatory government and probity in public life," close quote. The champions of this new dawn were Mbeki, President Olusegun Obasanjo of Nigeria, and the late President Abdoulaye Wade of Senegal. Their efforts were commendable, but for various reasons, it all petered out. The sad truth is that it was always going to be difficult to convince most African leaders to genuinely embrace good governance and human rights. Under pressure from Western countries who use development aid as leverage, they were nudged in that direction. The attack on the Twin Towers in New York on 11 September 2001 by Al-Qaeda jihadists changed everything. The Americans and their Western allies focused on the war on terror. The West's focus on Africa shifted to the need to fight jihadists who had established a presence in parts of the continent. Ever since the United States sent troops to Somalia before the New York attack, there has been a constant Western military presence in Africa. Democracy and human rights have fallen off the radar. Whatever progress had been made on these issues, it is being rolled back, especially in West and Central Africa. A lot of African leaders pay lip service to commitments made to regional and continental institutions. There is a retreat from multilateralism. Unlike, for example, leaders of European Union member states or the G7 group of industrialized nations, African leaders do not meet regularly outside scheduled summits. They do not work collaboratively to achieve goals set by the continent's institutions or regional bodies. They are increasingly inward-looking, disinclined to open their countries to scrutiny. Multilateralism is viewed as intrusive because it demands adherence to values and standards they find meddlesome and onerous. It is not, however, in the interest of Europe in particular to turn its back on issues of governance and human rights in Africa. Poverty, political repression, and lack of physical security are fueling migration from Africa to Europe at a time when that continent faces strong economic headwinds caused by the war in Ukraine. Migration is the top issue that threatens the integrity and cohesion of the EU. Some argue the threat is an existential one. The new right-wing coalition government in Italy, led by Giorgia Meloni, has already threatened a naval blockade of Libya to stop migrants crossing the Mediterranean. A more effective intervention would be for the EU to engage Africa to tackle the causes of migration. I thank you. Listeners, do you agree that Africa is sliding backwards on governance and human rights? Does Africa need a new breed of enlightened leaders? Please post your comments below.